8.8 is Greek Jews in literature by Greek Gentile Orthodox authors. In other words, how the Jew is portrayed in modern Greek literature. Contemporary prejudice marks the poetic Story of the Little Jewish Mercado from Venice, 1627, which tells of the heroine's abduction by her Christian lover and her subsequent apostasy. It's called in Greek Isisiou to Avram, a mystery play probably written in 1635 by the Cretan Kornaros, who died in 1677. It's the only masterpiece of a Greek in that time. The earliest surviving edition was in Venice in 1713. So it reveals the influence of the Bible and humanistic treatment of the Jew. In Thesia, which continues to be revived in Greece almost annually and has been translated into the major European languages, the author presents an anthropomorphic God and depicts Abraham not as a Hebrew patriarch, but as a distraught father torn between his love for his son and the love for the God. For the next 3 centuries, Greek writers devoted their efforts to liberating their country from the Turks. As a strategic measure against the revolutionary tide, which finally led to the successful War of Independence, 1821 to 1832, the Turks created a climate of covert hostility between Greek and Jew. It wasn't until almost all of Greece was liberated, that's like 1912, that a humanistic treatment of the Jew was again found in Greek literature. The novelist Gregorios Xenopoulos wrote a drama entitled Rachel in 1909 on the expulsion of the Jews from Zante. Konstantinis Kavafi, the Alexandrian Greek poet, wrote a poem in which he philosophized ironically on the dangers of Jewish assimilation. And Nikolaos Vizinos published several refutations of the blood libel. The one Greek writer to portray the Jew in universal terms was Nikos Kazantzakis, who devotes a chapter to the Russian Jew in his travel book Tiicha Sti Rusia, What I Saw in Russia. Tiiza Sti Rusia. Here he sees the Jew as a rebel and a revolutionary by force of historical circumstance. In his autobiographical Anaphoros Greco, Report to Greco, he shows profound sympathy for the suffering of the German Jewish students he met in Berlin. In Jerusalem, he longed not only for his own God, but also for the Old Testament God, and he visited Mount Sinai to hear his voice, as Moses heard it. Kazantzakis nevertheless remained bitterly opposed to Zionism, which he considered a reactionary delusion. He showed admiration for Eliezer ben Yehuda, the father of the Jewish revival. In the novel with the Hebrew title Todah Rabbah, 1934, which means thank you very much, Kazantzakis portrays the Russian Jew as a one facet of a single consciousness that experienced and mirrored the complex, fluid, many-sided reality of the Soviet Union. The playwright Spiros Melas turned the historical drama in Judas, first produced in Athens in 1934. In this play, Judas is portrayed as a revolutionary leader who joins Jesus for the liberation of Judea. Manolis Georgiou Skoulidis wrote Hypothesis Dreyfus, the Dreyfus Case, 1960, which he dramatized modern opinions about this famous trial. Pandelis Georgiou Pravelakis, influenced by the ideology of his close friend Kazantzakis, wrote O Lazarus, Lazarus, a drama in which he examined the attitude of an early Christian toward the new religion. A prose work by V. Gazis on the Cain and Abel theme in 1955 consists of seven allegorical accounts, the last of which predicts an eventual atomic war. Several authors were personally involved in World War II, wrote works dealing with the Nazi occupation of Greece and their concentration camp experiences. One of them was Elias Venezis, whose play Black Sea was published in 1945. Venezis' novel Okeanos, The Ocean, gives a sympathetic portrayal of a Jewish stowaway from Smyrna bound for the United States. Jacob Campanelli, who spent the years 1943 to 45 in Mauthausen, wrote the first draft of a prose work for his experiences in Mauthausen and published a final version 65. His pro-Jewish sympathies are very evident, since after the liberation he remained in the camp until all the Jewish survivors who wished to immigrate had immigrated to Palestine. The famous singer Nikis Theodorakis, who sang Campanelli's, we'll call it a cantata about Mauthausen, was very popular in Israel. In later years, he became very anti-Israel. But for many decades, he was very, very pro-Israel. Other works on the concentration camp theme are the play Epistrophie apoto Buchenwald, returned from Buchenwald, 1948, by Sotiris Patazis, and a long poem by Takis Olympios, 40382, inspired by the number branded on the arm of a girl who survived Auschwitz. A volume of poems by Sofia Mavrochidi Papadaki, Toliludi tis Refras, the flower of the ashes, had its origin in a flower she saw growing amongst the ashes of Dachau. Papadaki also wrote a life of David and short stories about Ruth and Jonah. Vassos Kaloyanis, one of the several non-Jewish authors, wrote about the Jewish communities in Greece, and he wrote the book Larissa Madre Israel, Larissa, the Mother of Israel. Dimitris Chagis wrote about the Lianina Jewish community in Mikrimas Polis, a small city, and the Archimandrit Nikodemos Vafiadis gave an account of the Jewish community of the Timotiko in his book Israelitiki Kinotis Dimotichiu. The art critic Angelos Yorgos Prikopiou, who spent a year in Israel, described his impressions of the country in his book O Leos tis Bibliou, the people of the Bible. The image of the Jew in Greek literature is still clearly identified with the history of Judaism and the Bible. In modern times, however, Greek authors are trying to create an emphatic, three-dimensional image of the Jew as a Greek citizen whose sufferings must not be forgotten. Yorgos Zografakis of Salonika, a non-Jewish writer, edited the works of Yosef Eliah and published essays on modern Jewish figures such as Herzl and Agnon. Greek Jews weren't so active in literature. There was a painter and journalist, Julius Kaimis. We talked about Yosef Eliah a lot. There's the French author Albert Cohen, who grew up in Corfu, who wrote a lot of novels about Jews in growing up in the Ionian Islands. J. Matarazzo wrote the poignant book Kie Omos Oli Tusden Pethanen, Still They All Have Not Died. And P. Chaizimiu wrote a book of a commemorative verse entitled Bnei Israel in 1957. Joseph Massas investigated the cultural achievements of the Jews of Yanina. And other notables were Yosef Saki, Baruch Shibi, and the filmmaker Nestoras Massas, who converted during World War II and made many documentary films about the Jews of Greece and the Holocaust. But he retained a burning interest in his Jewish heritage and the tragedy of his people. The national poet of Greece, Dionysius Solomos, from 1798 to 57, published in 1822 a series of sonnets inspired by the Bible. In one of these he compared the revolutionary Greek nation to Zion reborn. The poet Cavafy wrote two poems about the Jews of the Hellenistic period. In the poem About the Jew, 50 BCE, his protagonist is the imaginary Yansis Antonio, who desires that there will always be Jews, holy Jews. The second poem relates to Alexander Yanai and his wife, Hellenizing rulers of the Jewish state at the end of the Hasmonean period.